Thank you, Steve. It's good to see everyone on screen, and I echo Steve's welcome for our day together. I'm Graham Sparks. I'm president of Luther King House, one of the partner theological institutions hosting this conference, and it's a great pleasure to be here and to introduce our first keynote speaker of the day, the Reverend Professor Elizabeth McKinlay. Elizabeth is a member of the Centre for Public and Contextual Theology at Charles Stuart University in New South Wales, Australia, where she is a leading researcher into issues of spirituality, frailty, and aging. So that in itself suggests she's an ideal person to have with us today. She's also a lecturer at St. Mark's National Theological Centre and has numerous other involvements and commitments. Liz has been a leading voice in this whole area with her writings particularly, and any of us who have engaged in any kind of interest research in this area will know them. Amongst other things, books on spiritual growth and care in the fourth age of life, the spiritual dimension of aging, finding meaning in the experience of dementia, and palliative care, aging, and spirituality. So you can see we have a really excellent speaker to lead us off today. Liz, welcome, and so glad you can be with us from down under. Ought to say as well that as well as her extensive research, Liz is also a registered nurse and an Anglican priest. Welcome, Liz. You're the right person to address our conference. As always, as yesterday, there'll be an opportunity for us to have questions and discussion towards the end. Please refrain from using the chat room until then, but the chat room plus the raising of a hand will give an opportunity for us to ask questions towards the end. And Liz, I understand, is, as well as raising a lot of questions for us, Liz is using a PowerPoint, which I think I'm right in saying will be available to everyone as well. So that's great. I'm sure people will like to know that. Thank you, Liz. Over to you.
Okay, I hope I can get this PowerPoint up then. Well, it's great to be with you. I was going to say this morning, and the title is a big one, and I'm sorry it's that big. But I think it's an important question to look at aging and frailty. We're very much into well-aging and maximising well-being and aging, but questions about implications for faith and for the church are really important. And so I'm going to move on, and I've got a lot of questions that will come up in this presentation, and I'm also going to present a little bit of material from some of our recent research in this area. I'm just going to pull out one thing there, right. So I want to start with just mapping out the whole area, and narrative story is vital for us as human beings. And I want to put it in a context: narrative, the individual, culture, the church. And I want to just mention one of the greats in gerontology to begin with here. And it was Erickson in 1997 said, since we lack a culturally viable ideal of old age, our civilization does not really harbour a concept of the whole of life. We concentrate on young people, families, and we forget about the rest of the life. But the second thing there, our stories define who we are. They carry our identity as we interact with others in our families and the wider society. And of course, our stories are closely intertwined with our faith. It's our story, our individual story, our community of faith story, God's story. And yet, So often there's disconnects between the individual older person and others, disconnects between the story, really the story. And I'm talking about the depths of story here, not just a thing to do to pass the time, but something that goes to the depth of what it is to be a human being. And in this presentation, I'm going to focus on the experience of frailty. Frailty and the final life journey. I like to think, and I didn't coin this term, I like to think of this final part of the life journey as the final life career, that it's no less important than the life that's gone before it. And in some ways, there are some important tasks that need to be done as we grow older before we reach the very end. Some of it in the bush track here, some of the journey can be over rocky ground, some of it into beautiful, calm places. But the final life career is vitally important. So how do we make sense of frailty? And so we could ask, what is the experience of being frail like? And we then can take this experience in different ways. We can look at the experience of frailty from the perspective of the person who sees another becoming frail. Or we can take the perspective of the frail person themselves. And a question there, how might we respond to people who are frail? What does frailty look like? And so we're getting into lived experience here. And so I just want to unpack a little here about facing one's own frailty. Certainly in the work that I've done in various research, and then also, I'm sorry, I'm distracted by a cat here who wants to be in on the whole scene. And in my own writings, frailty and dependence are feared by many. And in fact, again, Erickson said that this can be the hardest part of the life to navigate. Issues of frailty and suffering loom large for people who've always believed that they could change whatever was happening in life. And there are many unexpected experiences of life. And in the 9th stage of life, which was one that was written by Joan Erickson, Joan and Eric Erickson, coming up to their 90s, were still thinking about, what is this life? What's it all about? And they set out a 9th stage. And it was interesting that when Joan finished writing this, Eric had predeceased her. She was 95 at that stage and still vitally involved in life. But it's interesting that this can also be a time, this aging could also be a time when human doing changes to human becoming. And we need to ask, what is God's plan for us then? And so I want to get rid of the, if you like, the easy part, if you like, of the frailty. It's the stuff that we recognize most readily, the failing body and so forth, and then move on to talk about the spiritual side. And frailty, what it is recognized clinically as a geriatric syndrome that arises due to multiple deficits to body systems. And frail people are likely to engage in low physical activity, have few social interactions, and chronic diseases requiring medical care. And of course, we could say that they engage in low physical activity because their body won't let them anymore. So there's that. But about 10% of people aged 65 to 75 and half of all people aged over 80 are frail. And this is aggravated by lower social status, comorbidities, medication use, and lowered immunity. But there is more to frailty than bodily issues. A holistic perspective of frailty takes account of all physical, mental, social, and spiritual dimensions. And that is, how do older people who experience increasing physical losses and disabilities, how do they actually deal with these losses? And we need to take the perspective that takes account of the psychosocial and spiritual aspects of the person, not just the physical. And I would like to suggest that in some cases, frailty could be seen as a lack of nourishment of the soul. And a really important question for us to look at is, can frailty be prevented or reversed? Kat, can you go away, please? And I just wanted to bring in a little bit of recent research on this. Thompson et al. 2018 looked at prevalence of frailty in 4 cohorts and studies in Australia. And they concluded that if frailty could be prevented or reversed, it would have important implications for large numbers of older people. And they found that 8,804, if you like, older adults, 21 of them were identified as frail and a further 48 as pre-frail. And although research into frailty is increasing, recent medical advances are not necessarily going to be able to prevent frailty. And of course, little research is focused on issues of frailty and meaning. We took it on board to do a study of the lived experience of frailty, which was completed in 2019. And we looked at issues of frailty from a spiritual perspective. The experience of living with frailty, of course, may be different from looking from the frail person's perspective than that of a care provider's perspective. And so another question, spiritual growth. Spiritual growth, I want to say, is potentially still possible, even in frailty. And in fact, spiritual growth is potentially possible until we draw our last breath. It's interesting, when we were going into doing some interviews in one of these aged care homes, and the research assistant was asking the staff member she met if it was fine to go and see this particular resident. And the staff member looked at them and said, well, there's not much point, you know, you won't get much from that person. And of course, as you could well imagine, when the research assistant went in, introduced herself and sat down and spent time with that person listening to the story, there was just so much wisdom and richness that came out. And so, do we really know those who we journey with? And I think sometimes in the busyness of care homes, this doesn't happen. And I'm very aware of this last year, when it's been difficult at times to get into care homes, even as pastoral people, to provide that extra care. So, and that's another whole talk, we won't go there. But we need to learn to see with fresh eyes and to really see the person for the first time. Now, I want to just give you here a figure that I have designed to, and it's in some of my publications, to illustrate what the spiritual dimension looks like, and it's tied up very much with meaning. I could have put 3 intersecting circles or ovals there, one for body, one for mind, one for spirit, and the interaction. I would put the spirit in the middle and the others interacting with that. And just for argument's sake, we're just looking at these one by one, only the spiritual. How we connect with ultimate life meaning is mediated through relationships. And relationships, obviously, intimacy, being known at the depths of my being with others and or God. Creation, creativity, and here I take in the natural environment, and then looking at human imagination that comes in as we're co-creators with God, and the presence of meaningful activity, and for those who are engaged in work, that this could perhaps be meaningful. The arts, of various importance to us at different stages of our lives. And one of the things we found in our study was that with the arts, many of these frail people had fantastic memories of music and art, for example, but they no longer had the energy to be engaged in them. And then religion. And religion I put in there because we're all spiritual beings, and religion is part of that. For the person who doesn't have a religious faith, they will work out their religion in whatever way, whether it's be a following of some, what could even be a sporting team or whatever it is, but ritual and symbol and liturgy and so forth is vitally important to us all. And a well-functioning religion takes in all of relationship, creativity, creation, and the arts. And that's just gone through that very, very quickly. Now, I won't go through all of this because I'm very conscious of the length of time, but you'll be able to look at this. With the aims of the project, we wanted to find from a group of frail people, and we did 24, this was the second stage of a study, 24 frail older people, and they were from 71 to 103, I think it was. And we wanted to find out from them where they found meaning in their experience of frailty. We had multicultural, multi-faith, and no faith affiliation with them. They did, all of them spoke English and were cognitively competent. And we've been through all the necessary ethics and so forth. And we use Catholic healthcare as our settings. From the in-depth interviews, we found that final meaning seen in examples of peace and joy, which could be linked with inner strength, and inner strength becomes an important part of our findings in this study. And this, the outcomes of this, that those who had greater inner strength seemed able to transcend and show greater spiritual well-being. This construct may have important clinical implications for care and well-being. And it's interesting that in nursing in Scandinavia, they've been looking at this for a few years now from a nursing perspective. And I think it's got implications for pastoral and chaplaincy work. Now, one of the questions we used, and I've used this in a lot of areas when I do spiritual reminiscence too, what is hardest for you now? How do we enter this conversation? And apart from asking that critical question is, where do you find meaning in life? Asking the question of what is hardest for you now seems to be a very effective way of cracking into what is happening for these people. Just briefly, some of the responses came out as having decreasing mobility, the importance of having control of your health. And so many people, if I ask them, what do you think about as you look forward to growing older? Do you look forward to that? And so often people will say, as long as I'm healthy. So that if you're not healthy, there's not something you're going to be looking forward to at all. Clement, and these are all pseudonyms, Clement said on that question, give me the strength to be in here. This is the residential aged care, because I can't change. I can't change things. I can't go out. I can't go for a walk or something like this. I can't do anything. And then he said, but at least I have my brain. I can think the way I want to think. Still others found it hardest to be alone in aged care. And that's another issue that I'm not going to spend time on, but it's really, really important one. I just want to mention this particular woman, Sophie. What was hardest for her now when we spoke with her? And she said it was getting another disability on top of a number of other conditions that she had lived with for years. She'd lived with an auditory neuroma and its complications for more than 40 years. And now she's recently been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And she says, well, I suppose at the moment I've tried to live with the neuroma and all that went with that. Now it's trying to live with this new illness, this Parkinson's, and all that entails. I try, and people say, oh, take your time. Do this, do that, and do that. They just don't know how hard it is to kind of, I am taking my time as much as I can, but yes, maybe yes, that is the hardest thing now. I've mentioned inner strength, and I've just a summary of responses here. Faith in God, God, belief in God, family, control, sense of being out of control. One of them talked about having an interior tranquility and said it's there with me the whole time. Another who was struggling with faith said, maybe God, it's hard to believe. Another says, I don't know, I just do it. Another simply, God gives the strength. And often in that, a self-awareness of vulnerability stimulates inner strength and self-transcendence. And so what does this inner strength look like? Different for different people. We had mostly Christians in the group. We had a number of people who were atheists, and we also had a few people of the other major faiths. Margaret said, I suppose basically just trusting God. I mean, he's there all the time, and you know that God the Father, he loves us. He's not going to test us beyond our means. So whatever happens, just trust, and I think you can get through it. Helen said, but I guess I've really accepted the fact that I'm dying. I feel very comfortable with that. So now I'm just enjoying the trip. And Xanthi, but it was not that hard. I was laughing about it because the Holy Quran, there is a chapter that God will never give you more burden that you are not capable to carry. And it's interesting that those first two, the first and the last one there, how they are stated, are the themes that are supporting inner strength, struggle and faith, support in times of crisis, regrets, forgiveness, prayer, religious faith, relationships, hope and joy and fear. And you know, a question which we've also found is so important to ask when you're coming to a person that you may know something about from some notes that you've got from some records or from other staff, but you really don't know this person, but to ask them, what do you think God is like? Now, I don't go around asking people, do you believe in God? And with our group, this could have been a little tricky. But you know, we had 24, 25 people in this study, and every one of them, regardless of their religious background, was asked, what do you think God is like? And the people who were atheists really gave us some very good answers, because they had an idea of what they thought God would be like if God existed. And you've got a jumping off point, you've got a starting of the conversation. And so it provides a window into the individual sense of inner strength. And I just wanted to tease this out a little. Inner strength, people will often talk about coping. How does the person cope? Now, I want to make a distinction here between the pastoral and the chaplaincy role and the psychology role. In psychology, and I know we have from some of the literature that comes out about spiritual coping, but coping to me is a concept that's usually situation specific, whereas inner strength will bring that strength to face any situation in the person's life, and it becomes a way of being. It's not a situation specific thing. It's a way of being. It goes to the depth of who the person is. And embracing suffering. With increasing vulnerability, there may be a stimulus to for change of being and becoming, to work through vulnerability. And this involves really a change in the meta framework of being, which is, as I've just said, more than coping. And it encompasses the whole of the human being, and it embraces the whole of the life journey. And of course, the impact of COVID-19 over this past year has accentuated these whole needs. Engaging in the final life career, learning to see through new lenses. It's through struggle and loss of previous abilities and relationships that new hope is born. And these factors lead to inner strength. Pass on with this one now because it would take me off to a lot more places. Developing the inner strength and self-transcendence. Inner strength is an important aspect associated with self-transcendence. And Viktor Frankl talked about this as being a self-forgetting, which made it possible for you to reach out to others. And it's on the pathway towards peace and hope and joy. The person who has a sense of inner strength will readily respond to the positive of that question, seeming almost to confirm their deep sense of strength and well-being. And you know, when we have finished doing all of our data analysis and we had got all the themes and I've just given you a snapshot of this right now, I just had a feeling, having read all of the narratives from all of the participants, I thought, you know, we had sought to give them open-ended questions that they could respond broadly to where they were. But I was very conscious of the fact that so many of them spoken about love in some shape or form. And so I did a word search through the whole of these, and I have collected together the ways in which participants responded to and showed love in their lives. And surely this is about that self-transcendence. This is about that inner strength. Ruby said, I adore you, my God. I love you with all my heart. Arthur, these are very different people. Arthur said, I love to see the jacarandas when they come out. I love the colour. And then he moved and he said, I love the colour of the vestments the priests wear. I love the music. The music is just, I told you, on Easter Day, they sung the whole Schubert Mass. And Margaret, I love being with people, with friends. Helen, I just know that I'm loved. Not because I've earned it, it's his free gift. Nancy, I love kids. Fred, oh, I love singing. I just definitely love singing. And of course, he would have had a bit of a rough time this last year in being able to sing with the COVID. And Xanthi, and she says, and then in our religion, Muslim, it is true. It is creation of God and God is the creator. So we have to love the creation of God, the creator. And so this wonderful, well, it's just a summary, but how these people, love was important in their lives. And so my last slide, I want to summarize this here and say the final life career. The final life career is as important as all of life stages that have gone before. But in fact, even if we've had problems in the past, we can still go back and deal with those in the now. So acknowledging all that, the following may be present. Struggle. Struggle is important, and struggle can occur at any time. And how important for the pastoral presence, for the spiritual care in the time of struggle. The finding of inner strength, the supporting of the inner strength, the possibility for the older, frail person to be able to speak of how they find this inner strength. And that then goes on to support and affirm them in the next situation that they have to deal with which may be difficult. The peace, love, and joy which come from being alive in the spirit. The searching and finding of meaning potentially right to the end of life. And how wonderful to be able to journey, seeing, being with, and seeing each person as they are, being open to the possibilities, to their hopes and fears, and walking beside them. And spiritual care and support, affirming each person in their narrative, being present, resisting judgment of the other, honouring and supporting relationships among these frail elders. A new life may be possible where meaning is found, sometimes for the first time, and the final life career may be enhanced beyond all expectations. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay.
Thank you. There is so much there for us to reflect on and talk together about, and you have graciously allowed us time as well, so thank you. Please feel free to raise a hand through the probably the participant box, or otherwise put a question in the chat. And I noticed the PowerPoint has already appeared there, so we'll be able to look further at that in due course. but let's have a chance to talk with Liz about some of the issues she's raised. Adam, let's start with yourself. Thank you. Adam Biddleston.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much indeed for that really inspiring talk. Only just thinking about, where do we find frailty in the Bible, and how does God's use and relationship with those people speak into this conversation about final life career?
Well, I think some of this is implicit, because I think this is one of the things, and actually Andrew Cameron and I have just had a chapter in an encyclopedia on aging, on aging in the Bible, and that's been an interesting thing to look at that, because from much of history, regardless of what happened with the really, really old people who were supposed to have lived hundreds and hundreds of years, we really don't know so much about that. We do know from archaeological evidence, as well as from the Bible. If we check through, probably around the time of David, 46 was quite a good age. So there's not much in the Bible there. And in the New Testament times too, people did not live so long. And this is another thing I like to talk about, in that before we get to looking at frailty, we have to consider that we can't really live as our parents or grandparents did, because they didn't have the health that we have now. There are certain things that alter that, but generally speaking, we have to look at what does it mean for us growing older now. And we've got really a new whole stage of life there. And if God has given us this gift of life, how do we use this gift of life? It's not to sit quietly in the corner and get out the rocking chair. I do have a rocking chair, which I got in Costa Rica, and I love my rocking chair, and I sit out and watch the sea and think nice thoughts in it. But that's only for a little while. And I'm busy keeping my body in good shape so that I can still do the things that God wants me to do. But I think in the church, we really have to rethink, we can't put people who are still capable of ministry, we can't put them out to pasture at this stage. But then chronological age is not the only factor. We've got to look at genetic potential. We've got to look at a whole range of things. And so we have to care for those who cannot be fit when they're older. But we then also have to not waste the God-given gifts that people still have and can minister. So how do we use that? How do we do that now? And that's a really, really big challenge for us. Retirement's sort of gone out the window. I don't know that I've answered your question.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for the question, Adam. In the chat, Madalena has made an interesting comment about comparative studies she's done with people in Rwanda. She asks you, Liz, do you think the findings of your own studies cross cultural boundaries, cross cultural contexts?
Yes, they do. And this has been really, really interesting, because I thought initially my doctoral studies were with a very Anglo-Celtic group of older people, older people living independently. And I developed my original model, which I published on that too. But when, as time went on and I did more research and more writing and more teaching, and then I started to get invitations, particularly from countries in Asia, from Singapore, from Japan, communications from Taiwan, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and so forth. And people were saying that my work was speaking to them where they were at. And I was surprised, because I was thinking, why would people want to hear my work when they're coming from very different cultures? And I was very conscious that I came from an Anglo-Celtic culture, and I didn't think I had anything to give to them. But it sent me back to thinking about what I think my model looks at goes beneath the culture. It goes to the very roots of what it is to be human. And I think that's what's happening there. And certainly some other work I've had published had been with some Eastern Europeans who had dementia, and we had done some spiritual reminiscence work with them, and they had responded really well to that. So I think that, you know, wherever you are working, you have to listen to the people. But I think my work seems to have been accepted by these people, and I've just been amazed, blown away by the response I've got from when I've worked, for example, particularly in Japan and in Singapore, from older people of different faiths and different cultures, how they felt that this was important for them. So it's surprising.
Thank you, Liz. A question from Sue Stillwell. Sue, are you there? Do you want to ask?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry,
Thank
a few button problems.
No worries. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Elizabeth. I had the wonderful opportunity to meet Elizabeth about 10 years ago when you came to the UK. Yes, when I first started as a chaplain in MHA. And with that in mind, I just wanted to ask a question. As a chaplain in elderly care, I have to be honest that everything that Elizabeth has said this morning totally underpins every aspect of the work that we do. So thank you for reinforcing that. My question really is, though, how do we really truly convey this sense of this gift of life and the importance of spiritual care? Very often to people who are non-Christians, who really operate outside this sphere of what we're all doing, and yet they have the greatest contact with people who are frail and are in elderly care homes, nursing homes, and also maybe in their homes as well. So that's a big one, I know, but it's something that really, really is on my heart. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yes. And I think it goes to the essence of what we're about, really, doesn't it? And I think there's not an easy answer to that. And as you were speaking, I was thinking also not only the fact that care staff sometimes don't know what's going on in the lives of these people they're caring for. And that's why the story is so important to bring out, that, you know, sometimes they have stereotypical views of, and quite often people who are doing personal care in a care home have not a lot of background, education, and they might be from a different culture and not understand the rituals and the things that are important to the people they care for. So that in itself is a problem. How do we get through? And I have conversations every so often with people who are working in residential aged care who are trying to get through to the staff they're working with. How do you prepare these people? How do you equip them? And I'm saying, you know, what kind of education have they had? What kind of support have they had? And they seem to have had a lot of support, and yet nothing's changed. And then you see some people who are just doing absolutely wonderful things in there. And I was also on the other side of that, if I may. I'm thinking about the person who sees no hope, who doesn't believe in God, and who's at the point of dying. And I had one of those in the preliminary study to the one that I talked about today. And it was so sad because this woman, she told me that she was Church of England. And of course, the Church of England per se has not existed in Australia since the 1970s. It's been the Anglican Church in Australia. So it gives you a little bit of a message. And she's very, very keen on it, but she would not come to a service. She didn't want prayer. And the thing that had kept her going until she got to the stage she had emphysema and had terrible problems speaking and breathing, she went to the ex-servicemen's club, and that was her church, I guess. And she couldn't do that anymore. And it was so hard to actually reach into her as a human being, to touch into the depths of her being. And I found that at the time really, really challenging. And, you know, I was there in that particular instance as a researcher, although I have a chaplaincy role in that that particular place, but she would not see me in my official role as a chaplain. You know.
Thank you. Question in the chat from Sandra Palmer. Sandra's asking Elizabeth whether you'd say something specifically about loss of hearing, how that so often becomes a butt of people's jokes and humour, but is a real disruption to relationships. Loss of hearing. Any thoughts, comments you would make?
Well, certainly. Well, that's something I have hearing aids myself. So, you know, I know a little bit about that. But as someone said at one point, that sight problems cut you off from your environment, but hearing problems cut you off from people. And that's a very important factor, I think. You know, I have been waging a little private war on this in a local residential facility where I was leading before COVID struck, and I haven't been able to do the small groups since then, funnily enough. But we were doing small groups and doing spiritual reminiscence, and this just worked so well with these people. But one of the people, and these people all had dementia, and we were getting wonderful dynamics within the group and people making new friendships within these small groups. But one day, one of the women in the group didn't have her hearing aids in. And so the staff had brought the people to the room where we had this group going. And there was no way I could get anything sorted at that moment because it would have wrecked the whole group for all the others at the same time. So at the end of the group, I went back with the woman to her room. And when I arrived down near her room, I met her daughter there. And I said, oh, look, I was sorry your mother didn't have her hearing aids this morning. And, you know, it was really difficult. She couldn't be engaged. And the daughter said to me, oh, she said, some of my friends whose relatives have dementia have said that it's probably better for them not to have their hearing aids in because they get more confused. And I'm going, oh my gosh, you know, it's just, and, you know, And so I said to her, no, I think it's the opposite. They're more likely to be confused when they don't know what's going on, when they actually can't hear what's happening around them. And she was so relieved. She said, thank you for letting me know that. And so there's these myths that we have to deal with as well. So yeah, big issue.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. And picking up on your the questions you asked, particularly that question, what is God like?
Yeah.
In your research. Barnetta asks, how did you find atheists respond to that concept of spirituality?
Yep. Yeah, well, they responded quite readily to that. And I didn't talk about that in today's presentation because there really wasn't an awful lot of time to go down that track. But they had ideas of spirituality, and they had ideas of spirit and things, which some of it might have been New World type stuff, and but as long as it didn't involve God. And that wasn't an issue for them. And of course, some of the older people in these studies who had no relationship with the church, if you were safer talking about God than you were about religion, if that makes sense. And when I asked them, what do you think God's like? An atheist would tell me, and I didn't have any of that. I have some beautiful stuff on that, but I didn't have anything up today. And, one of them even said, if I believed in God, this is what I would think God would be like. And it was rather nice. So, yeah. So I might leave that there, but it was a much more non-threatening way to get into the conversation than to say, do you believe in God? Because that puts them up for a failure or success. And so I would not want to be setting up as judge and jury on that, but I feel it's important to open these conversations and give the person the opportunity to engage with these.
That's helpful. Thank you, Liz. And one or two other questions appearing in our chat. A general question really about the church care for the older generation. How could the church better care for older people, value their opinions and needs without forgetting the changes that are needed for the development of the church? Any responses to that?
Yes. Where do we start? I think I tend to emphasize aging because in my experience, whenever we just lump older people as being the same as everybody else, they fall off the end and nobody takes any notice of them, and I think that we need, I don't think God discriminates between anybody in the whole life cycle, but I can remember a very significant position in one place that was the person who had been heading this position up retired. They didn't advertise the position for a long time, more than a year. And then they no longer advertised it as aging. They advertised it as family ministry. And I'll leave that to your imagination as to what kind of position that then became within the organisation. And so they get side-railed. But we have enormous problems here. And I mean, I get labelled with this too, that, you're past it, get back in your box, that let the young ones have a go. And it's ageism. And what do we do about it? I don't know. I just think, you know, and I know somebody who was talking about, who was very strong on this. He talked about Jesus and the boy band, and that all of that happened in the New Testament times was all about young people, that old people weren't important. But actually, when you think about it and when you actually do the work on it, Jesus was quite a senior and mature person when he was doing his main ministry. He wasn't a young boy. He was, you know, if you look at the lifespan back in those days. And so we need to look at the whole of God's church. We need to look at every person. What are the gifts that people have? How can we work together? How can the young and old, without patronizing each other, be open and caring to each other and thinking outside the square? You know, we are co-creators with God. The Bible's not something that was just written back then and it's not a living document. It is. And it's God's word to us today, not just back when it was written. And therefore we being open to things that we possibly never thought of before, that we could change and be and do.
Thank you, Liz. I don't know whether other people's experience mirrors mine, but in pastoral ministry, I found sometimes that it was the older people who had the greatest sense of vision and were able to embrace change in ways that some of the younger generations found more difficult. So we shouldn't do automatically, I think, feel that older people lack that sense of willingness to grow and develop and bring about change.
Yeah.
But that's certainly my experience. We're going to struggle to get through many. Just one more, I think we've got time for, Liz, very briefly. Babs Lowe's reflects, she's beginning to do some spiritual reminiscence with care home residents. Any examples that have been successful in conducting that kind of study, I guess Babs means?
Okay, so this was on the chat thing, was it, or was it just something?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, look, the spiritual reminiscence is, and I sometimes think, is that a good term for it? Because it's not just talking about the good old days or anything. It's actually working with people. It's looking at where they find meaning in life. And it's bringing that into a spiritual perspective, their life journey with God. And it's dealing with things from the past and bringing them into the present. And it's healing and wholeness and looking to the future and what God wants of them now. We've developed this model. I actually first developed it following my PhD, because it seemed to be a really important way of helping older people to grow spiritually, to actually self-transcend and to become aware that they had this inner strength. And it's really interesting because a lot of people don't think it's possible. And we're hung up on story now. And in so many care homes, you go into them and they've got the little summary. This is the person's life, and it's in a little box or a frame, or it's by their bed or something. And that's the person. And that person's still alive. That person's still got a life, and they're still dealing with that life until they actually depart this life. And so there's that opportunity still for healing and for growth, for reconciliation, and for really learning to know who they are in relationship with God. And it's so simple, but yet it's so profound. And yet a lot of people have trouble knowing what it's actually like. And I've had where I've done sessions where I've worked with a group and I've done the spiritual reminiscence with them and asking the questions and so forth. And it brings out the nature of the questions are deep in themselves, very, very open-ended. And it brings out things from the very depth of the person. And it can be so healing. Even from my PhD, I had people who more than 10 years after I had had that meeting with them, they still contacted me and they were still growing spiritually and they want to share things with me. And we were going to do this last year. I had a little bit of funding to do a DVD professionally, which would show what does spiritual reminiscence look like. And of course, then COVID happened. And I wanted to do it with people who have dementia, because a lot of people have difficulty. They say, but you can't ask older people questions about meaning in their life. You know, obviously older people don't have meaning in their life, so you don't ask them. And of course, then we want to do with people with dementia, because so many people don't believe that you can have meaningful conversations with people with dementia. So we got the funding, we put out to get quotes for to do it. We got the quotes in, fulfilling all righteousness for the university. And then, of course, everything closed down. We weren't allowed to do anything with research and things like that. And we're still there, and I am hopeful it's going to happen. But it's just one of those things. Once you've seen this in action, and we've been doing workshops on it, and look, it's been used in Japan, it's been used in Singapore, it's been used they ran a randomly controlled study on it in Taiwan, would you believe, which got wonderful results. And I've worked with it in the US, Canada, UK, Ireland, all over, New Zealand, and so forth. And I just want to get that out there, because it's really about our story. It's about understanding our relationship with God.
Thank you so much, Liz.